In today's video, we will explore the origins of capitalism, but we will dig deeper than merely the Industrial Revolution and technological innovations that are much linked to the rise of capitalism. Is there something more complex behind it? For sure it is. So, you better grab something to drink because this is going to be entertaining and rewarding. Now, imagine we're standing in a 17th century workshop in a small Protestant town. The shopkeeper, a devout Calvinist, rises before dawn for prayer and then spends the day diligently crafting goods. He keeps ledgers of every penny earned and spent, and at day's end, he saves most of his profit instead of splurging on luxuries. Why? Not just to get rich, but because hard work and thrift feel like a moral duty. This scene offers a hint of what German sociologist Max Weber famously called the Protestant Ethic, a set of values that he believed contributed to the birth of modern capitalism. It's fascinating to consider how Weber's chain of ideas connects. The Protestant reformers did not intend to spark an industrial boom, but by urging people to serve God in their work, avoid idleness, and use time profitably, they unintentionally created a workforce and investor class ready to propel modern capitalism. The spirit of capitalism, once rooted in religious conviction, became a general habit of society. So much so that even as Western societies became less religious, the ethic of hard work and continual striving only grew stronger in the business world. Now, let's examine how this occurred and how Max Weber connected the Protestant ethic and capitalism. He noticed something curious. In places like Germany, business leaders and skilled workers were often Protestants rather than Catholics. Was this just a coincidence, or did Protestant values somehow encourage behaviors that led to economic success? Weber's answer was the Protestant ethic, a set of moral ideals emphasizing hard work, thrift, and efficiency in one's occupation as signs of personal virtue. In particular, Weber zoomed in on Calvinism, a branch of Protestantism, and its doctrine of predestination. According to Calvinist theology, God had already chosen who was going to heaven and who wasn't, and this decision was predestined, unknowable to people. You might imagine how unsettling this was for believers. How could you be sure you're among the saved? Weber argued that this anxiety had an unintended consequence. Devout Calvinists began looking for signs of God's favor in their daily lives. Worldly success, achieved through diligence in work and good economic stewardship, started to be seen as a reassuring sign that one might be in God's grace. So, Protestant businessmen and workers adopted an ethic of unceasing, disciplined labor. Idleness was frowned upon, and any lapse in hard work could be a cause for self-doubt about one's spiritual status. At the same time, these Protestants were taught to live plainly. Extravagance and indulgence were sinful. Profits should not be wasted on lavish pleasures. Instead, earnings were to be reinvested or saved, not for greed's sake, but as a moral responsibility. These might sound like common-sense business habits now, but in Weber's view, they were culturally revolutionary. In medieval times, religious life often emphasized withdrawing from worldly gain. Think of monks renouncing wealth. By contrast, the Protestant ethic sanctified everyday work and profit-making, not for greed, but for God. This was a profound shift in values that, Weber argued, laid the cultural groundwork for capitalism. This sense of duty towards work and productive use of time is exactly the spirit of capitalism. It's a spirit that, in Max Weber's words, is born of the Protestant ethic, originally religious in motive, but eventually secularized into a cultural habit. Weber's thesis doesn't claim that Protestantism caused the complex economic system of capitalism single-handedly, but it suggests that Protestant ethics greased the wheels. In places like 17th century England and the Netherlands, which were heavily influenced by Calvinist and Puritan ideas, people seemed especially inclined to form businesses, trade globally, and reinvest profits. Indeed, many historians note that these regions led in early capitalist development. As one analysis puts it, industrial development first took off in areas where Protestantism, especially Calvinism, had taken hold. This correlation begs the question, did the values of those communities make them more receptive to the new economic opportunities emerging in early modern Europe? Weber would answer yes. He would point out that a devout Dutch Calvinist clothmaker, for example, might work tirelessly, not just to feed his family, but to fulfill what he sees as his religious duty. And by doing so, he might build a thriving textile business. Multiply that mentality across society, and you have a recipe for economic dynamism. So, what happened next? While religious enthusiasm sparked the capitalist spirit, Weber believed that over time, rationality took center stage in modern economic life. What does rationality mean here? It's about replacing tradition or emotion with calculation, efficiency, and methodical practice. In a rational system, people follow rules and use measurement and logic to achieve goals. Think of a factory schedule or a scientific experiment, as opposed to doing things the old way, just because. Western society, from the 18th century onward, underwent a huge process of rationalization. Business and government alike started running less on personal whims or traditional customs and more on impersonal rules and organized procedures. The Protestant ethic itself contributed to this. Its emphasis on orderliness, honesty, and hard work dovetailed with a practical, rational approach to worldly affairs. A pious merchant would keep careful accounts because stewardship was a duty, maintain punctual delivery times, and plan investments shrewdly, all rational behaviors that also happened to be good for business. Over generations, these habits became ingrained cultural norms, even as the original religious motives faded. However, there is also a not-so-nice side of this trajectory of the society. As life became more rational and bureaucratic, individuals could feel trapped in an iron cage of rules and routines. This evokes the image of people confined by the very systems they created. Think of a modern office worker punching the clock 9 to 5, following company policy to the letter, or a factory worker on an assembly line timed to the second. The Protestant artisans had worked hard out of a sense of calling. A few centuries later, their descendants might be working just as hard, but now mainly because the economic system demands it. And we arrived at the Industrial Revolution when capitalism took off. The Iron Bridge of 1779, the world's first cast iron bridge, stands as an early monument to the new age of industry. It was built in England by a group of ironmasters led by Abraham Darby III, a Quaker, and thus part of a Protestant sect known for its plain living and business acumen. In fact, Protestant nonconformists like Quakers played an outsized role in the Industrial Revolution, especially in Britain. At one point, nearly half of England's leading entrepreneurs were Quakers or other nonconformist Protestants. Their reputation for hard work, honesty, and frugality made them successful in banking, steel, textiles, and more. For example, Quaker families founded major banks like Barclays or Lloyd's, and businesses like ironworks and chocolate factories. It seems these groups carried the torch of the Protestant ethic, right era of steam engines and power looms. The Industrial Revolution, late 18th to 19th century, was a time when all the elements we've discussed, capital, technology, and labor discipline, came together in a big way. Britain, a predominantly Protestant nation, was the first to industrialize. While many factors like coal deposits and colonial trade played a role, cultural readiness was key too. British society had, over the previous centuries, embraced traits like inventiveness and improvement mentality. The idea of progress fit nicely with the Protestant work ethic. Inventors, engineers, and entrepreneurs, many of them from dissenting Protestant backgrounds, felt it worthwhile to tinker, to invest in new machinery, and to organize large ventures. Over time, the factory whistle replaced the church bell as the thing that ordered people's daily rhythms. Yet the people following that whistle inherited a mindset that made them responsive to such regimentation. During the 19th century, as factories spread and railways crisscrossed continents, commentators noticed this ethos everywhere. Phrases like Protestant work ethic entered common speech, describing that person who just won't stop hustling. In the United States, which inherited a heavy dose of Puritan values, the ethic was particularly strong. We can see it in anecdotes like Captain John Smith in the Jamestown colony declaring, "He that will not work shall not eat," back in 1607, a very Protestant work ethic kind of rule for survival. Centuries later, that same ideal, work or starve, drove American industrialists and workers alike. Of course, it wasn't all rosy. Industrial capitalism brought harsh conditions for many laborers. Long hours in dim factories could make one yearn for the simpler life of earlier times. Weber's iron cage metaphor was a caution that while the new system was amazingly productive, it could also be dehumanizing. The bureaucratic organization of factories meant workers were often seen as just inputs to a process, hired and let go based on market needs, an impersonal fate quite alien to the communal life of the past. This led to new social challenges, like labor movements and calls for reforms, which, however, is another story. The point for our discussion is that the value system that helped create capitalism ended up universalizing itself. By the Industrial Revolution, you didn't have to be Protestant to internalize its work ethic. Catholic, Jewish, agnostic, all sorts of people in capitalist societies largely adopted similar habits of discipline and striving because the economic game rewarded those behaviors. Weber's Protestant ethic had, in a sense, done its job in setting the stage. Capitalism could now run on momentum. Today, we largely live in a secular world, yet the echoes of the Protestant ethic are all around. When you hear sayings like, work hard, save money, and you'll get ahead, you're hearing a descendant of Weber's Spirit of Capitalism. The casual pressure we feel to always be productive, that guilty feeling if we're being lazy, can be traced back to cultural roots in the Puritan ethos. We often measure a person's worth by their work ethic and success, for better or worse, a mindset ingrained over centuries. And while we might not think of it in religious terms, the storytelling approach Weber used helps us see the connection. It's almost as if the modern economy carries some DNA from those prayerful artisans and merchants of long ago. I hope that by now it becomes clear that capitalism wasn't just an accident of technology or conquest. It was also a product of beliefs and values. The idea that God smiles upon the diligent gave an extra push to behaviors that cumulatively built up capital and enterprise. And once the capitalist machine was running, it developed its own logic of rational efficiency, arguably outgrowing its religious cradle, but never forgetting those early lessons about work and thrift. Understanding this journey makes the complex system of modern capitalism a bit more human and relatable. It's a reminder that behind economic change are people with hopes, fears, and ideals. The next time we clock in for work or budget our paycheck, we're, knowingly or not, participating in a centuries-old cultural drama. The origins of capitalism, seen through Weber's eyes, is a tale of sermons and shopkeepers as much as it is of steam engines and stocks, and that is what makes it such a rich and engaging story. Stay curious, and like and subscribe for more content like this.